The desert that week had two faces. At noon, it burned white and hard as iron. At night, the cold came down as if the sky had been lifted away and replaced with glass. 8 men stepped into that place with packs that bit their shoulders and an order that was simple to write and impossible to carry. Find the missiles. Report. Survive. They were a needle dropped into the western reach of Iraq, small enough to be lost, sharp enough to draw blood if they were lucky. The helicopter that inserted them skimmed low in the blackout, thumped once, and was gone, its noise stripped thin by the wind until there was nothing but the hiss of sand against their trousers. They dug in with the habit of long practice. The patrol leader whispered the routine like a catechism. Hide, check comms, check arcs, breathe. Radio checks came back ragged. The main set sulked, and the backup set spoke like a sullen child. Half a sentence, then silence. The men adjusted antenna angles, as if they were coaxing a skittish animal. Overhead, the sky was the color of a gun barrel. Somewhere east, engines moved on roads the map called nothing. The patrol lay quiet, listening for the shape of the war. Ours was a war of distance and screens. Somewhere far away, jets hunted launchers that rolled out of barns and gullies to throw their fuel into the sky and then vanished again. The patrol was meant to be the eyes that could not be spoofed. They crawled to a rise, glassed the hardpan, watched a road thin as wire. A shepherd appeared, then a boy, then a dog. They had materialized out of the wind as if the desert itself had coughed. The dog lifted its nose. The world tilted. The choices narrowed to 2, and neither belonged in a training manual. The patrol slid back into the wadi and felt the landscape begin to breathe against them, heavy, interested. The patrol leader gave a hand signal. Move. Moving in that country felt like carrying a boat across a frozen lake. Each step had weight, and the horizon never shifted. The wind hauled at them, and the cold worked through wet layers until even anger slowed down. Radios failed properly now. The desert swallowed their voices and would not return them. A storm built from nothing, first a sting on the cheek, then pellets of sand like thrown salt, then a curtain that erased distance and sound alike. They leaned into it with scarves iced at the edges and goggles fogging. One man's breath raked his lungs like wire. Another's lips turned the wrong color. Night was a long, badly lit room, in which everyone had to walk without touching the furniture. They marched by compass and dead reckoning, kneeling whenever lights stitched the darkness in the distance. Their packs felt like smaller men riding them, hands over their eyes. In the lee of a low ridge, they took stock. Water was dropping. Food was now a symbol as much as fuel. Batteries were coin they could no longer spend. The patrol leader outlined the only thing that made sense. Walk northwest and keep walking, skirting roads, until Syria's line rose like a promise. They would listen for aircraft and look for any chance to call, for that was the job, but they would not wait to be found by whoever had lost the dog. The desert tested each man differently. One grew silent, pulled inward like a clenched fist. Another cursed in jokes, the way a man whittles wood when his hands are shaking. A third kept counting paces under his breath, a rosary made of numbers. They crossed a wadi that smelled of old water and dead goats, and followed its bends until it became a maze that put them in the wrong compass square. It took an hour to untangle, and in that hour cold moved into a body that did not have room for it. When they climbed out, one man's steps began to wander. He knew it and hated it and could not correct it. The patrol leader stopped, spoke into his ear, saw eyes that had receded behind frost and pain, and understood they were now carrying more than packs. They tried the stove. The flame was a flower that lived for a breath and blew out. Heaters, rations, the small comforts of a green army on a technological surge, all of it laughed in the wind. They wrapped their mate tighter, rubbed his arms while swearing at the horizon, and watched the cold perform its cruelty in stages. At last, the patrol leader made a decision, born of love and duty together. They would push. Momentum was heat. If they stopped, the night would treat each them the same way, one by one. They stood, lifted, moved. At dawn, the man who had been wandering lay down as if he had at last found a bed, and he did not get up again. They spoke his name softly, because it would have felt wrong to shout. The patrol leader looked at the ground, then at the map, and then far away. He had nothing to give the earth, not time, not ceremony, not words that would do. They went on because going on was the one thing that still belonged to them. The desert kept delivering witnesses. A pickup silhouette edged toward them over a low hill. Men in the bed, rifles upright, faces wrapped. The patrol slid behind stones, a thin line in the open. A flare arced up from somewhere else, a sickly pearl. Tracer stitched the air, the same straight logic in red and green. They broke contact the way they had been taught, like a zipper opening. 2 fire, 2 move, then the other way around, boots scraping, hearts in their throats. In that stuttering retreat, they lost a man to a bullet that seemed to have been written with his name on it. He turned at exactly the wrong heartbeat and folded as if a hook had caught him behind the knee. 2 men grabbed him, dragged, swore. The sand took prints that the wind skinned over almost at once, erasing evidence but not the meaning. Capture was not a single moment but an approach, a circle that tightened. Trucks appeared at strange angles, men in uniforms too new or too old to make sense, headlights jerking in the storm as if the light itself were nervous. The patrol split at a junction the map pretended was not there. Half toward a ridge, half trying to use the low ground like a cloak. The ridge group fought like cornered wolves and came apart anyway. One killed in the motion between firing and running, the others seized after the rifle bolts ran empty and their feet would no longer obey. The low ground group went on with a stubborn, frightened faith that the map would forgive them if they believed in it hard enough. From that split, the story becomes a braid. Some were taken, hauled into rooms where questions were instruments, into cells that smelled of old electricity and fear. The men who were captured did what soldiers do when the fight goes out of their hands. They measured time in drips, turned stubbornness into a craft, shrank their world to the next breath and the one after that. They were hurt, and they lived. They agreed after to say little about the rooms, and kept that promise because a promise felt like a piece of ground. One man did not stop. He put his head into the wind and went on alone. The storm scoured him down to bone and will. He moved at night and curled under what shelter he could invent by day, a bag, a ledge, the shadow of a stone. He drank the last of his water, and then something that might have been worse than nothing. He watched the compass go mad near wire and steady in open places, and put one foot in front of the other because quitting would not feed him. He stepped around villages that were only shadows and avoided roads by listening to them, because a road will tell you who it loves by the way it hums. He saw Syria at last, not as a line, but as a kindness, a border guard's face becoming a human event. The walk would be told later as a ledger of miles. For the man who made it, each mile had been an argument with himself that he kept winning. When the war blew past and the maps grew still again, the story remained unstable, like heat shivering above a road. Books would be written, versions would be offered, a court of memory would convene without verdict. Some said the patrol had been too close to villages. Others answered that any place worth observing is next to something that can betray you. Some argued the insertion date, the exact route, the permission they did or didn't have to shoot when the shepherd appeared. Men who had been there measured those arguments against the weight of a dead friend's arm, and the arguments felt light. What can be said without debate is this. The patrol went in small and came back smaller, 3 men dead. Vince Phillips to the cold that makes a liar of your blood, Steve Lane and Bob Consiglio lost under fire, and the rest scattered between captivity and one long walk out of the storm. The mission did not give the headquarters the neat stream of coordinates and confirmations it had craved. It gave something else. A record of what it costs to try to stand where the machines cannot go, to see with human eyes in a place that does not forgive error. Years later, sand and politics have both drifted. But if you stand in open country and the wind starts to talk, if you hear static in it, the memory of a radio refusing an order, you might think of 8 men under packs, of maps that promised more than they could prove, of the simple instruction written on the first line of the tasking order and the complicated human ending. You might think of the way cold can run a ledger on a body, of courage doing its quiet work when the horizon will not come closer, of friends who do not leave each other even when one of them must. You might remember that wars are often decided by air and armor, but they are also told afterward as footsteps in the dark. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.